Hey friends, my name is Cody Archer, and I want to welcome you to this week's Revive Live. We're so glad that you're joining us. Revive Live is a weekly show, and it's in cooperation between Revive Israel and Tikkun International. And today I have Asher Intrater with me. Asher,
hello, Cody.
Thanks for taking time to be with me today.
Always happy to be here.
Today we're going to talk about fivefold ministry. We've already begun talking about this just recently. We're talking about the importance of humility as a base for moving forward, or the right approach towards different leadership roles. Today we're going to go a little bit deeper, and so we're so glad that you're joining us. Now, Asher, before we get too far into where we want to go, I want to just go back in history a little bit. You're a young man in your mid-20s. You come to faith in Yeshua. You grew up in a Jewish home. You don't have any concept about fivefold ministry. You probably haven't even read the New Testament at this point. And you come to faith. Tell me, what was some of your first experience of connecting to fivefold ministry as a new believer?
You know, it's interesting you said that I hadn't had any experience with fivefold ministry. We're not even in that league yet. Yeah. I've never been in a church in my life. I don't have an experience with Jesus, with the Bible, with church, Christianity, nothing. I mean, this is, I come to faith, and everything is wiped clean. Everything is wiped clean. What I know is that Yeshua touched me. Jesus at that point touched me. And that there was something in the Bible that had truth. That's what I knew. Those were the only assumptions. And so we went forward, and I didn't know what to do. All I knew was that through a personal connection spiritually with Yeshua and through reading the scriptures, I could go forward. I had no idea. I thought when I first got saved that I was going to join a monastery. I didn't know what was going to happen. I say that because at that point, everything we decided to do wasn't fivefold ministry, anything. Had to do with you prayed, you heard from Jesus, you read the Bible, that was it. That's what it was, you go forward. Yeah. And so at that point, I began to realize, wait a minute, I need to join a congregation somewhere. I need to, and then we had this big surprise as we're reading, and because I came to know the Lord in South America, in Central America, and I knew Yeshua as Jesus. And then I start reading, wait a minute, he's not Jesus, he's not even Jesus, he's Yeshua. And wait a minute, he's Jewish, everybody in the New Testament's Jewish, what's happening? And you have to realize we're talking back in the mid-late 70s. It's not like Messianic Judaism was known. And I'm looking at this and I'm saying, what am I going, crazy? Is it, I'm praying, I'm reading the Bible. If what I understand is correct, everything I know historically about Christianity and Judaism, it's all wrong. This is it, but it's so obvious in the Bible. Well, now, is that arrogance? Or is it just saying, well, what are we going to do? And so we started looking and saying, well, if they were Jewish, and then we found out, well, there's other Jewish people that just came to faith. Maybe we should meet together. What time do we meet? When do we meet? How do we meet? Should we meet? What do we do? What holidays should we celebrate? What language do we use? Is it Jesus? Is it Yeshua? Is it Yeshua? Is it Messiah? Is it Christ? Everything. So what I'm trying to say is, the introduction to this is that our base of understanding was you can't accept anything traditional for what it is. You have to just say, where does this fit in the Bible? Not disrespectfully, but say, I was grown up to taught that Jesus was wrong, so everything is wrong. Let's just start working from it. Wow. From that basis, we began to come together as Jewish believers, Messianic Jewish concept, sharing the gospel with our people in its historical context. Now, I would say the next stage we got to was that as we were together, it was kind of amazing. We could feel the presence of the Lord in everything we did. And as we read the Bible, we said, look, the promises to Israel, to the church, it's all going to come together in the end times. And it's like, how did we get into this? I just got saved. I didn't have an end times kingdom restoration of Israel, the church, the world. Nothing of that. Yeah. We kind of stepped into this and we said, whoa. This is too big. This is too big for us. Yeah. We said we need to work together, and out of that idea that we needed to work together, we came up with this motto, which when I wrote the book Covenant Relationships, is saying you have to find a group of friends that you can learn to trust one another and work together, because this is just too big. Nobody is this good for this. And it started out at first with Dan Juster, and then with me and some other friends that were around Beth Messiah in Maryland in the late 1970s. And then Paul Wilbur came, and Eitan Shishkov in 1981, 82. And we began to just build a team. Michael Brown in 1984, and we began to work together as a team in covenant relationships.
Wow. So now you guys are building, you're growing. There's also this passion to plant new congregations. Each of you guys that you mentioned are now growing into leadership. How did you guys begin working together?
Well, this is an interesting thing because it developed. Our understanding of this developed. I think that's exactly your question. Yeah. So here we were all in one congregation. Dan Juster was the pastor, teacher, and we were all elders there. But we were looking at everybody. I mean, this is 1981. I'm looking at Paul Wilbur saying, "Seems to me you ought to be leading worship." What are we doing here? And so we were all together because we were in one congregation, kind of elders in that congregation. But then as God began to bless us, and we began to see people, we were very different. I mean, those of us, Dan is totally different from me, and I'm totally different from Eitan. Everybody's different from Michael Brown. Paul Wilbur's different. We began to say, wait a minute, it's not just different people. These are callings from God. This is not everybody's just called to be a pastor. These are callings and destinies from God, and things are growing. So we were stuck with this problem of what do we do now? Things are growing. People's callings are growing. We're being forced into leadership of things outside of bigger circles. What do we do? What's the next step of covenant relationships?
Wow. Now, did you guys have any outside influence from Gentile congregations, believers, leaders, even any of the fivefold apostolic prophetic kind of ministry? Was there an influence from the outside coming into you guys at that time?
Well, Cody, great question. That's exactly what happened to us right then. It was first of all from Dan Juster studying and leading this, and he said, look, we need to learn, there's some other people we need to learn with. It just so happened in our area there were maybe 3, 4, even 5 very quality ministries, networks that used a fivefold concept, and also we started reading in the Bible. So something happened at the same time. We met these other groups who were multiplying and using a fivefold ministry concept. And then we ourselves we had the revelation of Ephesians 4:11, that you're not just elders in one congregation under a pastor, but there are apostles, prophets, evangelists, pastors, teachers. And all of a sudden, we look to one another after reading that verse and say, now we have a biblical model how we can work together. I mean, Paul Wilbur wasn't called to be a pastor, and Eitan Shishkov wasn't called to be a prophet. How do we work? And all of a sudden we said, this works.
Wow.
Here's how we could cooperate together. And at the same time, we meet maybe 3, 4, even 5 other networks that are already using this model and multiplying, and everything they're saying to us is making sense. It was just an explosion of thought around 1984.
Wow. Now let's play kind of the other side for a second. There's many that's going to hear this and say, what? There's only 12 apostles. They're after the original 12 that Yeshua handpicked and discipled. After them, there's no apostles. There's no apostles today. There wasn't any after the original 12. What do you say to that?
Well, it's a great question. I think when we're talking about apostles, some people call this capital A and small a, but I agree that there was the original 12. And I want to say this, nobody replaces them. Nobody can be in that position. In fact, it says in Revelation 21 that the entrance of New Jerusalem on the gates are the names of the 12 apostles. I don't believe that we're going to replace those names with anybody else. I'm certainly not claiming to be that. None of us is claiming that. Those are the 12 that no one else can be.
Okay, so now is there actual evidence, though, in the New Testament that show us that there is a continuation of apostles today?
Well, let's look for what I see it happening in stages, and it's an interesting way, and I want to suggest to some of our viewers that like to read the Bible, it's an interesting thing once you start with the book of Acts and go through the epistles to see the development of this concept. So what happened, you originally had Jesus and the 12, and then he leaves and sort of Peter becomes the head of that group. Of course, they replaced Judas with one. But then, wait a minute, James became a leader there. He wasn't one part of the 12. And you had other people that started to come in. So that original group then got a little bit larger. Another one of Yeshua's brothers, Jude or Yehuda, he also became one of them. So that group. And then you had another breakthrough, which was the amazing person of Paul. And he wasn't in that 12. And what happened was, as I look at the progress, the gospel began to go out around the world, and there began to be a center of faith north of Israel, in a place called Antioch. And there, it says in Acts 13 that they were there, and it didn't say other apostles. It says prophets and teachers. You see, it becomes a revival center. It becomes a mother congregation. There are beginning to be other fivefold ministers. It can't, when they said there were prophets there, it wasn't talking about Isaiah and Jeremiah. It was talking about people within the congregation and teachers, in addition to pastors. So you already had evangelists and pastors. You don't see apostles there. Now, what happens in that congregation in Antioch, they pray, and they say, well, God is giving us now this world mission. It's almost, they became the owners, the possessors of the world mission after Jerusalem. Wow. And they said, now we need to start sending people out. Who should we send out? They pray, they fast, they said, let's send out Paul and Barnabas. Now, Paul and Barnabas were sent out as, I would say, maybe just missionaries, prophets and teachers and evangelists. They're sent out. Now what happens is they get sent out, they get persecuted, they begin to teach, people start coming to faith in all different cities, and what happens when they come to faith? They start to form congregations.
Yeah.
And then Paul and Barnabas say, now we got to move on. So what do they do when they move on? They appoint elders, they appoint pastors, and then those people are looking to them to lead them, and so by the time you get halfway through Acts 14, they say Paul and Barnabas, who are now the apostles. So that's a whole huge step forward.
Interesting. Yeah.
So if it's Paul and Barnabas, then it can be other people. And so they were sort of, as I look at it, blessedly forced into this because they're preaching the gospel all over Europe. Congregations are multiplying, people coming to faith. They're raising up leaders. What do you do with them? When you have ministries multiplying, leaders being trained, congregations growing, you have to get to a fivefold model. It's the obvious thing to do.
Yeah.
And so the two of them began to spread that around the world.
So then is there evidence of other people becoming apostles after Paul and Barnabas that you see in the New Covenant?
Yes, well, actually, this is an interesting thought. You may, as you read closer in the New Covenant and as you look through the epistles, you see that the epistles are being written as an apostle and his team, not just from Paul, and his team going out to the churches that are in relationship with him. And they're building this relationship between Paul and his team and the congregations related. It's this beautiful symbiosis, cooperation, partnership between this team of trainers, master builders, and the local leadership. And they're blessing one another and they're going forward. And that begins to grow. And what happens there is that, now this is the way I look at the epistles. Paul is writing to them, first of all, to give all these congregations instructions from him as the apostle and his team. But, this is fascinating, he's also beginning to get them used to the concept that somebody else is going to have to take his baton after him and take the place as apostles after him. And therefore, he starts out writing the apostle saying, this is Paul writing to you. And then he writes, this is Paul and Timothy. This is Paul and Titus. This is Paul and Silvanus. And what he's doing is he's introducing to them and he's saying, here's my partners. Let me read a verse to you. This might even be a surprise to a great Bible scholar like you, but listen to this. This is 1 Thessalonians 2. 1 Thessalonians 2 verse 6, and he says, "Avlo bikashnu lo kavod mibnei adam, v'lo mikem v'lo me'acherim, hagam shebetor shlichei HaMashiach hayinu rasha'im litkabed." And he says this. He says, we did not ask for honor for ourselves from other people. Is what we talked in a previous broadcast about. Yeah. There has to be zero honor. If there's any ego, any pride, any honor in this, it's death. It's poison to this ministry. He goes over and over again that. And then he says, Lo mikem, lo me'achrim. Not from you, not from anyone. He said, nowhere. We never asked. Not money, not pride, not honor, not fame, nothing, zero. But then he says, however, as apostles of Christ, of the Messiah, we were worthy to be honored. Now, I just want you to look at that word, apostles. Now, who wrote this letter? This letter, if you go back to 1 Thessalonians 1:1, it says this is from Paul and Silvanus and Timotheus. So he's writing to them saying, we, the apostles, me, Paul, Silvanus, and Timotheus, we're writing to you. And I can see this as, you even know this in our relationship, that my way of thinking is if I do anything myself, it's a loss. that everything we do is raising up younger people to come and take that, and everything, it's the content of what you're doing, but equal to the content is moving somebody else in to multiply. Yeah. Because Paul thought in terms of multiplying.
Yeah, wow.
And so here he's saying, now guys, you got to know me as Paul, but now it's Paul and Silvanus and Timothy, and then he did another letter with Titus. So at least we have there Paul, at least you've got Titus, Timothy, and Silvanus. I don't know how you could consider not. And when you look at Barnabas, who then took John Mark, and then you have other, I mean, it's obviously that this is beginning to multiply.
Wow, that is amazing. And so do you see any other evidence then even towards the book of Revelation concerning apostles?
Well, what I see happening now is they grow, and this is beginning to spread, and there's lots of them. I mean, if people don't think there's other apostles in 12, they can say, well, Paul's an exception. Well, I gave you, well, you've got Timothy, and you've got Titus, and you've got Silvanus, and you've got Mark, and you've got others. But listen, there's even somebody named Andronicus. I mean, you don't have to be, it's obvious that we're talking about what becomes a normal function. It's amazing, actually, when you look at Ephesians 4:11, that people say, well, we accept pastors today, but not apostles. Well, actually, the word pastor is only in one place. It's in that one verse. There is no other reference to pastors, and that's a shock. And there are other references to apostles. So I can make a case, actually, that there's apostles and not pastors, but we won't go there. We're saying, as I understand the language, they're saying this is normative, low level. We're talking about big apostles to replace any. No. We're talking about low level, servant-hearted people like deacons, like elders, like evangelists, like prophets, and there's also apostles in that level, including Andronicus. And there's prophets like Agabus. You don't have to be Peter, and you don't have to be Isaiah. This is part of normal. Now, it's interesting what you asked that. As it begins to grow, that whole generation, even the first generation, and in some sense the ministry generation, that second generation, they've actually grown, passed this on, and they're going forward. And you get to the level, the only one that, as I understand, wrote after, even into the third generation, was when you get to John, the beloved apostle, who's an older man now, and writes his gospel and writes the book of Revelation. And he says this, in Revelation 2:2, he writes to the church at Ephesians, which is where we get Ephesians. I mean, they were the home of the revelation of fivefold ministry. He writes to them. He said, "Now you have tested those who claim to be apostles, and you've discerned if they're false." Now, he couldn't possibly mean there's no discernment. If he meant that there are no apostles today, he would have said, well, thank God you don't receive Jezebel spirits and Balaam spirits. You don't receive apostles' spirits. He said, no, you discern them. Now, what would be the discernment?
Wow.
Now, think about this. If they were the immediate disciples of Paul, like Silvanus and Timotheus and Titus and Jude, who wrote scriptures, and Luke, who wrote scriptures, and Mark, who wrote scriptures, and Andronicus, who's written in the Bible, and Agabus, there's no discernment.
That's true.
So it has to be the next generation after them. You're talking about people raised up and are saying they're beginning to multiply, and people seem to have an apostolic anointing. Yeah. But there's some that are fake and are doing it out of pride, and you've discerned.
Wow. Meaning there's also right ones on the other side.
Right.
That's what discernment is.
Yeah, the discernment is there's got to be right and wrong.
Yeah.
And I'm saying it's actually that incredible verse in Revelation 2:2 that you're actually not just Peter and those, not just Paul and his group, not even the successor ones of Timothy, Titus, Silvanus, and others, because there'd be no discernment. You've got to be the next generation of ministry leaders that you've got to discern. Wow. And they're saying there's some that are good and some that are bad. Now, who knows? Was it 50-50? Was it 90% fake, 10% real? Who knows? It doesn't make any difference. But he's saying there's a group of, let's put it this way, unknown apostles. Yeah. No names.
Wow.
And remember, there's no names. They're not famous, but you need to discern. And I think it's John that actually sets us forward. This is a radical thing to say. I'm saying we're not only not the 12. We're not even John's group, which was a few more. We're not even Paul's group, which was more than that. We're not even the Titus, Timothy, Silvanus. It's like after that, you get to the sea of no-named, non-famous people that have to be discerned. That's the model that we go forward into history. When you get at the end of the Bible, that's what you hit. And that's what I think now that we're just talking about normal functions within the body, no honor, no pride, no ego, no manipulative fundraising, no nothing. We're just talking about humble-hearted people that want to serve and help evangelism multiply, help leadership training multiply, help congregations multiply, and give a strategy for the wider ecclesia to grow. That's what apostles do.
Wow, that's really good. That's really clear, that progression that you're painting, that picture. I think I heard this from you. I think there was a list of scriptures that you gave names and scriptures to, and I think it was at least 22 different people that had the title of apostle in the New Testament. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's interesting, Cody, that, you know, if you look at it, actually in the word Hebrew, shaliach for apostle,
yeah, I just was going to ask you
it's from the word sent.
Uh-huh.
It's amazing. You go all the way back to Exodus, and God said, I'm going to send Moses, I'm going to send you into Egypt. And then Moses says to Pharaoh, he doesn't say, let my people go. He says, send my people forth. It's almost saying the people had a destiny. Now, the word in Hebrew, shaliach, it can mean apostle, like in a bishop, a ministry leader. It can be the sense of mission. There's lots of Jewish organizations in Israel today that just say they have their shaliach, they're on a mission, ambassador type people. And actually somebody just saying in their lives, I have a sense of shlichut, I have a sense of just mission in my life. Non-believers, that's the word. Shlichut is you have a sense of personal mission. Yeah. And then funny enough, it's even another level down, where the word shaliach is also the word for pizza delivery boy, or anybody, when somebody comes to deliver something, they're the shaliach. So it's just a function of being somebody sent with a purpose.
Yeah, I love that. What time is the apostle going to deliver my pizza? That's fun. Well, Asher, thank you for taking time today.
Great.
And friends, I'm sure that you learned something new today, and I want to encourage you to share and like this broadcast. And we're just so glad that you're joining us today. And so we will see you again next week on Revive Live, and we just bless you this week. See you soon.